It was an unremarkable Tuesday evening when I made a decision that would forever haunt me. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows down the street as I made my usual walk home from work. The cool autumn air was refreshing, and the crunch of fallen leaves beneath my feet felt oddly comforting. Little did I know that a seemingly innocent choice was about to take me down a path of fear and regret. On this particular evening, I left the office late. My coworkers had long since departed, and the flickering fluorescent lights above me created an unsettling atmosphere in the empty hallway. I had just finished an important project. Despite my exhaustion, I felt exhilarated as I stepped outside. The world felt full of possibilities. Yet that exhilaration was soon overshadowed by the creeping sensation of discomfort. As I walked, I decided to take a shortcut through an alley rather than sticking to the well-lit street. This choice, simple and unassuming, would soon turn out to be a grave misjudgment. The alley was a regular route I had taken before. It seemed like a harmless decision to save a few minutes. I had always been cautious and aware of my surroundings, convinced that I could navigate any situation without incident. However, this time felt different. The alley was unusually quiet, the only sounds being the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding slightly faster as shadows danced around me. The dim light filtering through the high brick walls made the place feel suffocating. A warning flickered in my mind, but I dismissed it, too focused on getting home. As I neared the halfway point, I noticed a figure lingering at the other end of the alley. It was a man, standing in a hooded coat, his features obscured by the shadows. My first instinct was to cross the street, but the only consequence of that would be taking the long way around and ultimately delaying my arrival home. I weighed my options and, unable to shake a sense of bravado, I pressed on another bad decision. The man stood as I approached, and we made eye contact. His gaze made my stomach twist into knots. A voice in my head told me to turn back, but I muttered a quick hello and tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. He stepped aside, allowing me to pass, but something about his presence lingered in the air, thick and unwelcoming. As I continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Each step felt heavier, the air colder. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man following me, but he remained still, watching from the shadows. A chill ran down my spine as I rationalized my fear. Perhaps he was simply waiting for someone else. When I finally exited the alley, I decided to quicken my pace and merge back onto a busier street. The faces of strangers moving along with their lives instantly brought me comfort. My mind raced through the day's events, trying to convince myself that my worry was unproven and unfounded. Yet, every time the breeze whispered or a sound echoed, I felt the nagging sensation that something was off. Turning down the next street, I noticed a small convenience store that looked inviting. I thought it best to pop in and grab a snack, hoping to shake off the unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The bright lights inside provided a warmth that felt welcoming. It felt safe. I picked up some chips and walked to the counter where an older man greeted me with a disinterested nod. As I paid, a loud clang startled me. I turned to see the rest of the patrons glancing toward the entrance. The hooded man I had encountered earlier stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. My heart raced. I felt trapped. The grocery clerk didn't seem to notice the tension, but I could see the discomfort on the faces around me. I quickly took my purchase and exited the store, desperate to put distance between myself and that man. I nearly jogged back to the safety of the street, convinced I was imagining things, but that nagging feeling persisted. I fought the urge to look back, though curiosity gnawed at me. When I reached the corner, I slipped into a nearby coffee shop, hoping a hot drink would calm my racing heart. The faint aroma of coffee and the warmth of the building filled me with a temporary sense of security. I ordered a latte, watching the barista work, deliberately avoiding thinking of what loomed outside. Moments later, I took a seat by the window. I cautiously glanced outside, and my breath hitched in my throat. The hooded man was standing across the street, feigning interest in his phone but clearly scanning the area. The realization hit me like a cold wave. He was waiting for me. I felt the panic rise in my throat as I tried to formulate a plan. I stayed in the coffee shop for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the man to lose interest and leave, fearing the moment I would have to step outside again. Every sip of my drink felt like a countdown. Just as I reached the bottom of the cup, my phone vibrated, breaking my focus. It was a text from a friend asking if I wanted to meet up. I hesitated, weighing the options in my mind. I debated texting back, but the mere idea of leaving the shop and facing the man sent chills down my spine. My heart raced in my chest as I realized I had no choice but to leave. So I texted my friend back saying I'd join them shortly. Gathering my courage, I stood up and walked toward the door, taking a deep breath. I pushed it open and stepped outside, my heart pounding louder than ever. At first, I couldn't see the man. Relief washed over me, but the sense of triumph was short-lived. As I walked with a purpose, I glanced down the street, and there he was, standing still but now further down the block, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, pretending to engage with my phone, desperately hoping to blend in with the crowd. But as I approached the next intersection, I sensed someone close behind me. Fear gripped my throat as I turned to find the man had followed me, now a mere few feet behind. His eyes locked onto mine, an unsettling smile spreading across his face. Panic surged through me, overwhelming reason. Without thinking, I ran. My feet hammered against the pavement, heart racing with adrenaline. I didn't dare look back. I dodged between pedestrians, fear sharp and real, consuming my thoughts. I could hear footsteps gaining behind me, but I pressed on, breathing hard as my lungs burned. As I approached a more populated area, I flung open the doors of a nearby bar, almost stumbling inside. I turned, breathing heavily, scanning the room to see if he had followed. The dim lights and laughter of patrons contrasted sharply with the pulsating dread inside me. For a long while I stood at the bar, my drink forgotten in my shaking hands, watching the door. Moments felt like hours until finally, I saw him pass by outside, heading in the opposite direction. I let out a shaky breath, but the relief felt hollow, my heart still racing. Reflecting on that night, I realized that my insistence on taking a shortcut, a decision made to save time, had led me to a near brush with danger. The stranger in the alley remained a shadow in my memory, a reminder of the dark turns life can take when we let our guard down. I never considered myself a fearful person. I was always the one who laughed at horror movies, who reveled in the adrenaline rush of a good thriller. But that all changed one summer's evening, a summer that would become a haunting memory I could never shake off. It started innocently enough. I was driving home from work on a typical Thursday. I was tired, my mind wandering through the day's events, when I took a familiar shortcut through a wooded area near town. This route always reduced my travel time significantly. Yet, that evening something felt different. The air was thick with humidity, and shadows seemed to gather along the sides of the road as the sun dipped below the horizon. As I navigated the winding road, I noticed a flicker of light deeper in the woods. Curiosity gnawed at me. Was it someone else enjoying the woods at this hour? I weighed my options: press on and reach home with dinner waiting for me, or turn around and investigate. If it were just a couple of campers, I could ask if they needed help. Little did I know, my decision would set off a chain of events that would forever change my perspective on the nature of choice. I turned the car off the main road and followed a narrow, bumpy path, the headlights illuminating the dense trees towering like silent sentinels on either side. With every bump, I felt a mix of hesitation and determination. I was taking a risk, but what was life without a bit of adventure, right? The light grew brighter as I drove further in. Eventually, I parked the car and stepped out, the air now thickening with an unsettling stillness. I glanced around, trying to pinpoint the source of that alluring glow. It didn't take long before I spotted an old fire pit, surrounded by scattered logs and trash evidence of past visits. But the light, strange flickering, was coming from a nearby clearing. Against my better judgment, I ventured towards it, driven by an inexplicable urge. As I pushed through underbrush, the air felt charged, almost electric, sending goosebumps racing up my arms. Then I saw a small, makeshift campfire surrounded by stones, the flames licking the darkening sky. But no one was there. Weird. I checked my phone, no service. I was deep in the woods and suddenly felt the latent weight of isolation pressing down on me. The light mesmerized me, the flames danced like they had a life of their own. Mindlessly I approached. That's when I saw the object lying on the ground near the fire, a strange, weathered box covered in what looked like intricate carvings. Ignoring that nagging voice at the back of my mind, I knelt beside it, running my fingers along its surface, feeling the texture against my skin. It was cold. The carving seemed to pulsate with the flickering firelight, drawing me in. There was an odd thrill in touching something that felt old, ancient even. As my curiosity bubbled, I made what would be my first major mistake. I opened the box. Inside was nothing but a few assorted trinkets, an old watch, a small mirror, and a strange amulet that felt oddly heavy in my palm. Maybe it was the adrenaline or the excitement of finding something unusual, but I couldn't resist slipping the amulet around my neck. The moment it touched my skin, I felt a chill run down my spine, yet an inexplicable warmth followed. I stood there, staring into the fire, entranced. Time seemed to lose its meaning as the flickering flames held my attention prisoner. I was oblivious to the shadows creeping in around me. The trees no longer seemed like silent watchers, but rather figures lurking, waiting. Finally pulling myself away, I decided it was time to leave. But as I turned to retrace my steps, it dawned on me that everything was different. The path I had followed was dark now, the trees looming larger and more oppressive. The familiar sounds of the woods, a chirping cricket here, a rustle of leaves there, had been replaced by an eerie silence. My heart began to race. Panic set in. I quickened my pace, trying to remember how I had gotten there. I arrived, back at the place where I had parked the car. But my heart sank. My headlights had gone out, and the car was shrouded in darkness. I felt foolish for lingering too long, for letting my curiosity drag me into this situation. I could barely see to find the door handle. I fumbled around my pockets, searching for my keys. To my horror, I couldn't find them. I swore I had grabbed them. A sinking feeling knotted in my stomach. I glanced behind me, noticing the darkness of the woods stretching farther than I had realized. The sound of a snapping twig made me jump. Suddenly, the sensation of being watched washed over me. I could feel the weight of eyes piercing into my back. I took a breath and turned slowly, scanning the edges of the trees. Nothing, just shadows. My instincts screamed for me to move, to get out of there, but the amulet around my neck felt heavier, as if it were tethering me to that spot. Then I started to hear it, the whispering. Soft at first, like a breeze rustling through leaves, but it crescendoed into a cacophony of hushed voices, calling my name. I stumbled backward, fear skyrocketing, and that's when I noticed the shadows shifting, darting between the trees, almost as if they were alive. In a blind panic, I ran. My heart pounded in my chest as I darted through the thick brush, trying to remember the way back. Branches scratched at my arms and legs, tearing my clothes and the soft skin beneath them. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, and the whispers grew louder, echoing in my ears. I could hear them pleading, warning, or perhaps mocking, I couldn't tell. After what felt like an eternity of running, I stumbled into a small clearing and finally spotted the car. Relief flooded over me. I had found it. But as I reached for the door, the whispers turned into screams, terrifying, anguished cries that reverberated within my mind, echoing my deepest fears. Just as I was about to grab the handle, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, shapes, emerging from the darkness, their forms swirling with the shadows. They were close, far too close, and their voices rose in a terrifying chorus. I jumped into the car, slamming the door shut, and desperately fumbled with the keys, praying they would be in the ignition. To my utter horror, the key was still missing. The shadows danced closer, their forms growing clearer, twisted faces twisted in anguish and rage. With every second, I could feel the amulet growing colder against my skin. Then it happened. My knee-jerk reaction took over, and I began thumping on the steering wheel, honking like a madman, praying someone would hear me. In that moment of chaos, I remembered I had a flashlight in my bag. I whipped it out, bathed everything in bright light, and the strange silhouettes recoiled. The screams replaced with silence, but the malevolence lingered. I decided then that I was done being a victim. I jumped out of the car, leaving the bag and flashlight behind. I didn't stop to think. I sprinted back through the trees, following the barely visible trail I had stumbled onto earlier. The fresh air cut through the claustrophobic darkness, but the whispers reignited. This time they felt desperate, like my own internal fears taking on a life of their own. Finally, as I burst through the trees onto the road, I was met with the golden glow of streetlights. The terrified adrenaline gave way to relief, though I was still shaking. I kept moving, deciding to walk home, my thoughts a murky mix of terror and disbelief. I thought back to the box and the amulet, realizing I never should have touched them. My decision, guided by curiosity, had invited something sinister into my reality. In the following days, I never told anyone about that night. I tossed the amulet away, buried deep beneath layers of dirt and regrets, hoping to erase the memory of that chilling experience. But even now, every time I hear whispers in the wind, every time I find myself alone in the woods, I feel that fear gripping my heart anew. It serves as a reminder that sometimes curiosity can lead us down a path of darkness we are not prepared to face.